Hello, Anthem. I hope all is well for you today on this particular day. It's Tuesday. It's a rainy, cold day, so I hope you're doing well. This past Sunday, we talked about, began a new series where we talked about, that was called The Good Book, where we're talking about the Bible. But before we get into some of the Bible stories, we talked about the story of the Bible, and we talked about how, for a lot of us, we know the stories in the Bible, or we know some of the stories in the Bible, but we don't know necessarily the story of the Bible. Or if we do know the story of the Bible, it's very easy for us to miss it. And we started off Sunday's sermon looking at some things that make the Bible difficult. And a couple of those that came up, or at least that came up in my community group as we talked about it on Sunday night, was that it's not in order, and which means it really doesn't read like a book. And a lot of times what we do is when we think of Scripture and we look at the Bible, we see it as a book and we approach it as a book the same way that we would approach a novel or even a nonfiction book, where chapters, and it has an arc and has a beginning, it has a conclusion. And the Bible is just not designed that way. It's not put together that way. In fact, it is a collection of books. It's not a book. But even the books within a book, even the books within the Bible don't necessarily read like a book. For instance, you take something like we call it the book of Philippians. It's really a letter. It really reads more like a magazine article in our world than it would a book. Maybe the closest book that's in the Bible that reads actually like a book that we would be used to would be the story of Job. It has a beginning, it has an end, it has a middle. It has character development. It has full character development between Job and his wife, his children, his friends. God comes into there. There's a villain, and you're trying to figure out, is the villain God? Is the villain Satan, when he asked to be able to sift or tempt Job? Is the villain Job? Who's the good guy? Who's the bad guy? Which always kind of makes for a good movie when you're trying to figure out that, or a good story, or a good book. So a book like Job actually does read like a book. A lot of the other books just simply don't. Some of them do. You have a story like Esther that has a little bit about, that kind of feels like a book, but it kind of fits more like an episode in a series, a television series, than it does a book. So understanding that the Bible is a collection of books, and that if I'm going to really understand what Scripture is and how I'm supposed to use it, I have to understand that. So understanding this collection of books, so it's not going to read like a book, is certainly not in order, and it's very easy to get overwhelmed. Another thing that came up from Sunday that got a lot of traction, and afterwards, after the 3 times that I taught, and then even, like I said, in my community group, was this idea of it may be better to spend some time on one book in the Bible over the course of a year than trying to read through the whole Bible in a year. I know a lot of people have that goal, and they'll sit out and they'll say, I'm going to try to read through the whole Bible in a year, or set out to go to have read the whole Bible. Now, I think reading the whole Bible is a great idea, and I think knowing being familiar with all the books in the Bible are tremendous, and that's why we meet on a weekly basis, and we teach from the Bible, and we have Bible studies, and we do all of those kinds of things. But what I mentioned was it probably would be more impactful if you spent the year studying the book of John, as opposed to trying to read through the entire Bible in a year. Read through the book of John. Read in 4 or 5 different translations to get a different perspective. And if you spent time praying and thinking and studying and doing some extra study as you go through that book, I think that could be way more beneficial than just trying to read, kind of like you're drinking from a fire hose kind of thing. Here's another good way to read a book in the Bible. We'll take the book of John as an example. It has 21 chapters in it, so about 3 chapters a day. Take you a week to read the book of John. 3 chapters a day doesn't take very long. So you can read through the whole book of John in a week. Well, go back and do it again the next week, and then again the next week, and again the next week. So over the course of a month, if you're disciplined and you're dedicated to it, maybe some days in there you have to read 6 chapters because you missed a day. But you'll have read through the book of John 4 times in the course of a month. And then every time you do that, use a different translation. Use the NIV one time, use the Message one time, use the New American Standard one time, use the New Living one time. If you'll do that, that gives you a really very clear perspective on a book like John. If you took something smaller, say like the book of Colossians or the book of Philippians, 4 chapters, you can read Philippians in 15 minutes. What would it be like if you spent every day, of the course of a month, you set out to read Philippians every day for a month? Now, you probably wouldn't make that goal of 31 times in a month or 30 times in a month. But if you set that goal, you might read it 20 times in a month. And at the end of that month, you will have a much better understanding of what's in the book of Philippians as opposed to just trying to power read through a bunch of things. The Bible is difficult. It's difficult for lots of reasons. It's out of order. We try to read it like a book when it's not a book. But there are some ways that we can do that to help us better understand what Scripture has to say. The most important thing for us to remember as we begin this Good Book series is this, is that knowing the story of the Bible is just as important as knowing the stories in the Bible. In fact, it's probably more important to know the story of the Bible. And what is the story of the Bible? We have the Bible because there was a resurrection of Jesus. Jesus did what he said he was going to do, and he rose again on the third day, and lots of people saw him, and lots and lots of people wrote about it, and lots of people were willing to give their life to make sure that people knew that he was the Messiah. So the story of the Bible is the resurrection of Jesus, and you have to get that nailed down in what you believe before any of the rest of the Bible will even begin to make sense. We'll talk a little bit more this week. Next couple of days, I'll post about the bald head and the bears, and we'll talk about that, and we'll see where that goes. Talk to you soon.